the shadowed cradle of eternity, where prophecies whisper like thorns against silk, one vow shattered the veil between blood and breath, binding a king to his forbidden echo. The wind howled through the crumbling spires of Castle Dravenmore, carrying the scent of frost-kissed stone and distant pine. Alara Voss stood at the edge of the parapet, her fingers tracing the jagged outline of a gargoyle's wing, its stone feathers worn smooth by centuries of rain. At 28, she was a Dhampir born of a fleeting union between a vampire lord and a mortal healer from the mist-shrouded valleys of Eldoria. Her mother had died in childbirth, leaving Alara with a legacy of half-life, the pallor of immortality without its endless night, the thirst that gnawed at her veins but never fully quenched. Abandoned by her father's kin, who saw her as an abomination, she had wandered the fringes of the vampire realms, a healer by trade, mending the wounds of outcasts in forgotten hamlets. Yet her own scars ran deeper, a chronic frailty that sapped her strength, leaving her breathless under the weight of unspoken longing. She desired not power, but belonging, a tether to something eternal that wouldn't consume her fragile spark. Below, the forest stretched like a black sea, its branches clawing at the moonlit sky. Ilara's breath fogged the air, her pulse a faint drum against the chill. She had come to Dravenmore not by choice, but by summons, a cryptic missive sealed with the crimson wax of the Vampire Council, demanding her presence for a ritual she could scarcely comprehend. The prophecy, they said, foretold ruin if the lines of pure blood mingled with Dhampir taint. But whispers in the taverns spoke of war brewing in the shadowed courts, where rival clans vied for the throne left vacant by the fall of ancient kings. Inside the great hall, the air hung heavy with the flicker of candelabras, their flames dancing shadows across tapestries frayed by time. Velvet drapes in deepest crimson framed arched windows, through which the wind slipped like a lover's sigh, rattling the leaded panes. Kingthorn Blackwood paced the length of the room, his boots echoing softly on the polished oak floor. At over 500 years, he was the reluctant sovereign of the nocturnal realms, born in the blood-soaked fields of medieval Bohemia to a line of warriors who had forged empires in darkness. His immortality was a curse etched by a demon's pact during a plague that claimed his mortal family. He had chosen eternity to avenge them, only to watch the world forget their faces. Solitary by nature, Thorn bore the guilt of countless lives ended by his hand in the endless wars of his kind, betrayals in marble halls, assassinations under starless skies. Ethical to a fault, he enforced pacts among the undead, mediating feuds with a restraint that masked his inner torment. He sought redemption not in conquest, but in the quiet acts of mercy that his crown forbade. A silver locket, etched with a wilted rose, the symbol of his lost humanity, hung against his chest, a constant reminder of the warmth he could no longer feel. He paused before a towering mirror, its gilded frame cracked like veins of lightning. The glass reflected not his form, but a void, as vampires cast no image. Thorn's hand hovered near the surface, fingers curling as if to grasp the phantom he once was. The council had convened him here to renew the ancient oath. No union between full-blooded immortal and Dhampir, lest the prophecy unleash a cataclysm that would topple kingdoms. Wars had simmered for decades, clans fracturing over territory in the frozen north, political intrigue poisoning the courts of Vienna's underbelly. Thorn, as king, was to seal the decree with his blood, ensuring purity amid the rising threats from human hunters and rival immortals. The heavy doors creaked open, admitting Ilara. She entered with the grace of someone who had learned to move unseen, her cloak of woolen gray shedding droplets from the storm outside. Her eyes, a stormy hazel flecked with gold, met his across the room. Thorn felt an unfamiliar pull, like the tide drawn to the moon, a recognition that stirred the dust of his forgotten heart. She was no mere summon. The air thickened with the scent of her. Earth and wild herbs, laced with the faint copper of restrained hunger. "You are the Dhampir," he said, his voice a low timbre, resonant as distant thunder. He did not approach, respecting the invisible boundary of their worlds. Ilara inclined her head, her dark curls tumbling loose from their braid. "Ilara Voss, summoned by your decree, though I wonder why a healer of outcasts merits the king's hall." Thorn's gaze lingered on the delicate hollow of her throat, where a pulse fluttered like a trapped bird. He turned away, toward the hearth where embers glowed like dying stars. "The prophecy binds us all. It forbids what nature might decree otherwise. Tonight, I must reaffirm the vow, or our realms fracture further. War encroaches, betrayals from the eastern clans, whispers of uprising. Your presence ensures the ritual's witness." She stepped closer, the floorboards sighing under her weight. The warmth of the fire played across her skin, casting her in hues of amber and shadow. Introspection gripped her. Was this summons a trap, or a thread in the tapestry of her isolation? And if the prophecy lies, if blood calls to blood not as curse, but as salve? His laugh was bitter, a sound like cracking ice. "Prophecies are chains forged by the fearful. I have borne guilt enough to know freedom's cost." He removed the locket, the wilted rose glinting in the firelight, a symbol of love lost to time, now a talisman against temptation. As the council elders filed in, robed in black silk, their chants began, a low hum that vibrated through the stones. Thorn pricked his palm, blood welling dark and viscous, dripping onto the ancient scroll. Ilara watched, her own veins aching in sympathy, a forbidden empathy blooming unbidden. The ritual demanded her oath of silence, her half-blood a mirror to the purity they guarded. But as Thorn's eyes met hers once more, a spark ignited, defiance in the face of decree. The wind outside raged as if the night itself protested. In that moment, the vow felt not eternal, but fragile, a breath away from fracture. When the chants faded, and the elders departed into the mist, Thorn approached her, the locket still clutched in his fist. "You feel it too," he murmured, voice laced with the weight of centuries. "The pull, but to yield, it would doom us both." Ilara's hand trembled as she reached for the locket, her fingers brushing his. The touch was electric, a jolt that blurred the line between life and shadow. Doom, or deliverance. He drew back, but not before the seed of rebellion took root. Outside, thunder cracked, and in the mirror's empty gaze, their fates intertwined, unseen, unbreakable. What choice would he make when the prophecy's chains tightened and love demanded its blood price? The storm's fury had ebbed into a mournful drizzle, pattering against the leaded windows like tears too weary to fall. Ilara lingered in the great hall long after the elders' chants dissolved into silence, the air still thick with the metallic tang of Thorn's blood and the acrid smoke of extinguished candles. Her fingers, still tingling from that fleeting touch, curled around the edge of a velvet-draped chair, its fabric worn to a whisper-soft sheen that caught the dying firelight. She felt the locket's absence like a phantom weight in her palm. The wilted rose, emblem of loves long buried, now vanished back into Thorn's grasp. Her body ached, not from the chill seeping through the stones, but from the insidious frailty that shadowed her every step, a reminder that her half-life teetered on the edge of dissolution. Healers mended others, but who would mend the fracture in her own blood? Thorn had retreated to the shadows near the hearth, his silhouette a study in restrained power, broad shoulders cloaked in black wool, the faint gleam of silver buttons catching the ember's glow. He turned the locket over in his hand, the metal cool against his unchanging skin, evoking memories of a mortal dawn when he had pressed it into his sister's palm before the plague claimed her. Guilt coiled in his chest like thorns, sharper now with Ilara's presence, a Dhampir, forbidden fruit in the orchard of his isolation. The prophecy loomed, not as ancient scripture, but as a political blade, wielded by the Eastern clans who plotted in Vienna's fog-choked alleys. Whispers of war had reached him, assassinations in the courts, alliances fracturing like ice under spring thaw. As king, he mediated with ethics forged in centuries of loss, sparing lives where conquest demanded death. Yet here, in her gaze, he glimpsed a temptation that could unravel it all. "You should leave," he said finally, his voice a low rumble that stirred the air between them. He did not look at her, focusing instead on the hearth's fading warmth, as if the fire could burn away the pull he felt, a gravitational ache, drawing his eternal night toward her fragile dawn. "The ritual is complete. Your witness seals the vow." Ilara rose, her skirts whispering against the oak floor, each step a deliberate defiance of her weakening limbs. The hall's vastness pressed upon her. Tapestries depicting forgotten battles where vampires clashed with human hunters, their threads stained with the patina of time. She approached the window, peering into the mist-shrouded courtyard where torches flickered like distant stars. Rain traced rivulets down the glass, distorting the world beyond into smears of black and silver. "And if I choose not to?" "The prophecy forbids union, but it does not command solitude. I've wandered too long in the margins, mending wounds I cannot heal in myself. Your world. It calls to me, like blood to an open vein." He crossed the room in a blur, stopping just short of her, the scent of aged leather and storm-damp earth enveloping her. Up close, his eyes were abyssal pools, flecked with the gold of forgotten sunrises. Thorn's hand hovered near her shoulder, not touching, but close enough that she felt the unnatural chill radiating from him, a void where heat should pulse. "Solitude is my penance," he murmured, the words laced with the weight of 500 winters. "I chose eternity to avenge the dead, only to become their jailer. Wars rage because of pacts like this one, clans betraying kin for thrones built on lies. To break the vow, it invites not just ruin, but the death of what little mercy remains in our kind." Her breath caught, a shallow rhythm against the steady void of his. Introspection flooded her. Was this pull madness, or the first true tether in her abandoned life? Her mother's tales echoed, a healer's love for a vampire lord, ending in bloodied sheets and a child cursed to straddle worlds. Ilara's hand rose instinctively, tracing the air near his chest where the locket lay hidden. "Mercy? Or fear? You speak of guilt as if it's a crown you wear alone. I've seen your kind discard the broken. Outcasts like me, left to fade in hamlets where the sun mocks our shadows. Yet you stand here, ethical sentinel in a realm of predators. What if our blood mingles not as curse, but as the redemption you seek?" Thorn's jaw tightened, a muscle flickering like a candle in draught. He stepped back, the distance a chasm reborn, and gestured to a side door half concealed by drapery. "Come, if words fail, perhaps the castle's truths will silence you." They moved through corridors lit by sputtering sconces, their flames casting elongated shadows that danced like specters on walls etched with runes of warding. The air grew colder, laced with the musty scent of stone and forgotten incense, as they descended a spiral stair into the undercroft, a vaulted chamber where relics of old wars slumbered. Rusted blades from Bohemian fields, scrolls detailing betrayals that toppled lesser kings. In the chamber's heart stood a pedestal bearing a crystalline orb, its surface veined with crimson threads that pulsed faintly, as if alive. Thorn placed his palm upon it, and visions bloomed in the air, ethereal mists coalescing into scenes of carnage, vampire legions clashing under blood moons, political daggers glinting in candlelit councils, the Eastern clan's leaders whispering of a Dhampir uprising that could shatter the prophecy's hold. Ilara watched, transfixed, her hazel eyes widening as she saw her own reflection warped within, a half-shadow wielding herbs and fangs in equal measure. "This is the heart of our strife," Thorn said, his voice echoing off the vaults. "The orb reveals what the prophecy conceals, not just forbidden love, but the power it births. A union like ours could forge warriors unbound by night or frailty. But at what cost? Armies would rise, not for peace, but to claim that power. I broke lesser oaths in my youth, spilling blood for vengeance. Now, I choose restraint." Ilara's frailty surged then, a wave of dizziness forcing her to lean against the pedestal. Her vision blurred, the orb's glow bleeding into red haze, and in that vulnerability, a choice crystallized: reach for him and invite the storm, or retreat into her half-life's quiet decay. She extended her hand, not to the visions, but to him. "Restraint is another chain. Show me your guilt, Thorn. Let me carry it with you." His fingers closed around hers, the contact a spark that ignited the air, cold fire, eternal against ephemeral. The orb flared, crimson light bathing them in its embrace, and for a heartbeat, Thorn glimpsed a future unspooled, battles won not by blade, but by the light in her eyes, her touch thawing his frozen mercy. Yet betrayal lurked in the visions, a council elder's shadowed face, plotting to exploit their defiance. He pulled away, but too late. The seed had deepened roots. As they ascended, the castle groaned like a beast awakening, and Ilara's pulse thundered in her ears. Outside, the rain ceased, revealing a horizon scarred by distant fires, harbingers of war encroaching. Thorn's locket slipped from his pocket, clattering to the stone, the wilted rose staring up like an accusation. In that fallen symbol, their paths converged, but the prophecy's shadow lengthened, whispering of prices yet unpaid. Would he reclaim it alone, or let her hand seal the fracture? The Undercroft's chill clung to their skin like a shroud as Thorn knelt to retrieve the locket, his fingers brushing the cold stone floor where it had fallen. The wilted rose etched upon it seemed to mock the fragile light filtering through narrow slits in the vaulted ceiling, casting elongated shadows that twisted like accusing fingers. Ilara watched him, her breath shallow and ragged, the orb's crimson afterglow still pulsing in her veins like an unquenched fever. Her frailty had ebbed for a moment in that shared touch, a spark of borrowed eternity, but now it returned, a dull ache radiating from her core as if her half-blood rebelled against the temptation of wholeness. She leaned against the pedestal, the crystalline surface humming faintly beneath her palm, its visions lingering in her mind. Not just wars and betrayals, but glimpses of a union that could redefine the night, her hands wielding power over life and shadow, his guilt absolved in the warmth of her pulse. Thorn rose slowly, the locket dangling from his chain once more, its weight a pendulum swinging between restraint and ruin. He fixed it beneath his cloak, the metal pressing against his chest like a brand. 5 centuries had taught him the texture of loss, the silk of a lover's hair turning to dust, the velvet hush of battlefields strewn with the fallen. Yet Ilara's presence unraveled that numbness, her scent of earth and herbs infiltrating the musty air, stirring a hunger not for blood, but for the redemption he had long forsaken. The prophecy, that ancient edict forged in the blood of fallen kings, forbade this not out of fear of cataclysm alone, but to preserve the fragile politics of his realm. Eastern clans schemed in shadowed salons, their leaders, pale schemers with eyes like polished obsidian, whispering of uprisings, using the decree as a weapon to dethrone him. To break it would invite not just love's blade, but the full fury of civil war, alliances shattering like the orb's crimson veins. "We cannot linger here," he said, his voice a resonant murmur that echoed off the rune-carved walls, the words heavy with the philosophy of one who had outlived philosophies. "The castle's depths hold secrets that awaken with dawn's approach. Come, there is a ritual chamber above where oaths are tested, not just sealed." He extended his hand again, not quite touching, but close enough that the air between them crackled with unspoken choice. Alara hesitated, her hazel eyes searching his face, tracing the faint lines etched by centuries of moral tempests. Her own traumas surfaced in that gaze. The abandonment by her father's kin, who had cast her into the wilds as a child, her healer's hands stained with the blood of those she could not save, her body a vessel forever teetering on the precipice of fade. Belonging, she realized, was not a gift, but a gamble, one that demanded she risk her fragile spark for his eternal shadow. She took his hand, her warm fingers intertwining with his cool ones, the contrast a sensory jolt, flesh against marble, life against void. They ascended the spiral stair, the stone steps groaning underfoot like the sighs of long-buried ancestors. Torches in iron sconces flickered as they passed, their flames painting the corridor in strokes of gold and black, the scent of melting wax mingling with the distant patter of residual rain. Whispers seemed to follow them, not from the wind, but from the walls themselves, echoes of past rituals, vows broken and mended in the fires of desperation. Thorn's mind raced with introspection. Every immortal was once someone who chose not to die, but what of those who chose to live halfway? Alara's touch ignited a dilemma, ethical to his core. To draw her into his world would be mercy or madness. The wars encroaching from the horizon, with their political daggers and battlefield dirges, demanded a king unyielding, yet her pull whispered of a throne built on shared light. The ritual chamber lay at the corridor's end, a domed sanctum ringed by arched windows veiled in frost-laced ivy. Candelabras of wrought iron stood sentinel, their unlit wicks waiting like breaths held in anticipation. In the center, a low altar of obsidian gleamed under a shaft of moonlight piercing the clouds, its surface etched with the prophecy's runes, symbols of severed bonds, bloodlines pure as winter's edge. Thorn released her hand to approach it, his cloak sweeping the flagstones with a soft hush. "This is where the vow is truly forged," he explained, his tone laced with somber intimacy. "Not in chants and scrolls, but in the mirror of the soul. The elders demand purity, but here, alone, one faces the temptation's truth." He struck a flint, igniting the candles one by one, their flames blooming like hesitant hearts, filling the air with the warm, beeswax perfume that clashed against the chamber's chill. Alara stepped forward, her skirts trailing like whispers over the stone, drawn by an inexorable gravity. The moonlight bathed her in silver, highlighting the delicate curve of her collarbone, the faint scar from a childhood wound that never fully healed, a mark of her mother's final, futile embrace. "And what temptation do you face, King of Shadows?" she asked, her voice a thread of challenge woven with vulnerability. Introspection gripped her anew. To yield would transform her frailty into strength, but at the cost of the prophecy's wrath, igniting wars that would consume the innocent she had sworn to heal. Thorn turned to her, the candlelight carving his features into stark relief, high cheekbones shadowed, eyes burning with the gold of suppressed fire. He removed the locket once more, placing it upon the altar, the wilted rose catching the flame's glow like a dried tear. "You," he confessed, the word a revelation that hung in the air, heavy as impending storm. "The prophecy forbids, but my guilt, it craves absolution. In Bohemia, I chose eternity for vengeance, watching my kin dissolve into memory. Wars followed, betrayals in courts where allies became dust under my blade. I enforced ethics to atone, sparing where I once slew. But with you, the choice is not restraint or ruin, it's life reborn from death's embrace." His hand cupped her cheek, thumb tracing the texture of her skin, warm and yielding, a sensation that pierced his unchanging core like dawn's first light. Alara leaned into the touch, her pulse thundering in her ears, a symphony against his silence. The air thickened. scented with wax and the faint copper of her rising thirst, her body awakening to possibilities long denied. In that moment, a ritual unfolded unbidden, not of blood or chant, but of choice. She could pull away, preserving the fragile peace, or press forward, sealing their defiance with a kiss that would echo through eternities. Her lips parted, breath mingling with his. The intimacy, a bridge over the abyss. "Then let mercy be our vow," she whispered, her fingers threading through his dark hair, drawing him closer. Their lips met, soft and inevitable, a collision of worlds, her warmth flooding his chill, his eternity anchoring her frailty. The candles flared brighter, shadows retreating as if in awe, the runes on the altar glowing faintly crimson. But as passion deepened, a distant rumble shook the chamber, thunder or the march of approaching foes. Thorn broke the kiss, his eyes widening with prescient dread, visions from the orb resurfacing, a council elder's betrayal, armies massing under false banners, the prophecy twisting their love into a weapon for war. Ilara staggered back, hand to her lips, tasting the salt of revelation and the tang of impending doom. The locket on the altar trembled, the wilted rose seeming to wilt further, a symbol of love's dual edge, redemption and curse entwined. Outside, the horizon's fires grew nearer, silhouettes of riders cutting through the mist, bearing the Eastern clan's sigils. Thorn's face hardened with ethical torment. He had broken the oath, not with blood, but with breath. Now the choice loomed larger. Flee into the night together or face the storm alone, his crown a noose tightening around their shared fate. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these immortal confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The chamber's candles guttered in the sudden draft, their flames bowing like supplicants before an unseen gale, casting erratic shadows that clawed across the obsidian altar. Thorn's lips still burned with the imprint of Ilara's, warm, vital, a forbidden elixir that stirred the embers of his long-dormant soul. Yet the rumble echoing through the stone was no mere thunder. It was the thunder of hooves, a distant cadence swelling like the pulse of war itself. He pulled her close, his arm encircling her waist with possessive urgency, the wool of her cloak rough against his palm, scented with rain and the faint, herbal trace of her healer's life. Ilara's heart hammered against his chest, a frantic rhythm that mocked his eternal stillness, her frailty evident in the slight tremor of her frame. The kiss had been a breach, a ritual of their own making, sealing not vows of separation, but an inexorable union. Now, the prophecy's guardians converged, drawn by the orb's flare or some traitorous whisper from the undercroft. "We must move," Thorn murmured, his voice a velvet command laced with the gravel of centuries' caution. He snatched the locket from the altar, the wilted rose glinting accusingly in the moonlight's shaft, now fractured by clouds racing like harbingers. The metal chain slipped over his head, settling against his skin like a noose of memory. His sister's final gift, a symbol of humanity's fragile bloom, now tainted by this defiant love. Guilt surged within him, not for the broken oath, but for the peril he had invited upon her. Ethical king though he was, mediator of shadowed pacts amid the brewing storms of clan rivalries, he had always chosen restraint, sparing a rival's life in Vienna's fogged salons, forging uneasy truces to stave off the civil wars that gnawed at his realm's edges. But Ilara's touch unraveled that armor, revealing the solitary ache of one who had outlived every redemption save this. She nodded, her hazel eyes wide with a mix of exhilaration and dread, the gold flecks within them catching the candlelight like stars trapped in twilight. Her body protested the haste, a wave of dizziness from her chronic weakness, the half-blood curse that left her veins parched and her limbs leaden, as if death itself lingered at her shoulder, patient and invisible. Yet in his grasp, Strength borrowed from his eternity flowed through her, a temporary salve against the decay. "The riders," she whispered, straining to hear over the rising wind that rattled the ivy-veiled windows, carrying the metallic tang of approaching steel and the low whinny of spectral mounts. Introspection clawed at her. This love, resisted in the great hall's measured distance, rationalized as mere empathy during the orb's visions, had become inevitable. A force as relentless as the wars her mother's tales had warned against. Abandoned by her father's kin, she had mended outcasts in Eldoria's misty hamlets, her hands skilled in herbs and sutures, but powerless against her own unraveling. Now, Thorn offered not cure, but transformation, a choice between her fading spark and an eternity shadowed by prophecy's curse. They slipped from the chamber through a concealed panel behind the altar, the mechanism grinding like a reluctant confession, revealing a narrow passage hewn from the castle's bowels. Torchlight from the corridor above filtered down in hazy beams, illuminating dust motes that swirled like lost souls. The air grew thicker, laced with the earthy musk of roots and the faint, iron bite of groundwater seeping through cracks. Thorn led, his steps silent as a predator's, while Elara followed, her breath coming in measured gasps, each one a sensory anchor. The rough texture of the walls scraping her fingertips, the distant clamor of the castle stirring to life, servants' hurried footfalls, the clash of drawn blades. Outside, the horizon blazed with unnatural fire. Not the aurora of northern lights, but signal flares from the eastern clans, their sigils of coiled serpents mocking the Blackwood crest. Betrayal festered in those flames. Thorn sensed it in his bones, forged in Bohemian battlefields where allies turned daggers in the dark. A council elder, perhaps the one glimpsed in the orb's crimson haze, had sold their secret for a throne's promise. The passage opened into a forgotten turret, its spiral stairs ascending to a balcony overlooking the courtyard. Moonlight silvered the scene below. A phalanx of riders, cloaked in black velvet and mounted on steeds with eyes glowing like embers, their banners snapping in the gale. At their fore rode Lord Vesper, elder of the eastern faction, his face a mask of pale ambition, lips curled in a smile that promised political venom over honorable combat. "Thorn Blackwood," his voice boomed, amplified by some arcane rune on his saddle, cutting through the night like a blade. "The prophecy stirs. Your dalliance with the Dhampir abomination profanes the bloodlines. Yield the crown, or watch your realm burn in the wars you so nobly forestalled." Thorn positioned Elara behind a merlin, his body shielding hers, the stone's chill seeping through his cloak. Her hand clutched his arm, nails digging into the fabric, drawing a faint sting he welcomed like a mortal's reminder. "Vesper," he called back, his timbre steady, resonant as cathedral bells tolling doom. "This is no abomination, but a bridge you fear. Your whispers in Vienna's courts betray not purity, but your hunger for power. I have mediated your feuds, spared your kin from the blade, yet you invoke the decree to claim what is not yours." Philosophy wove through his words, a lament for the beauty in human suffering, the light that pierced eternal shadows. Every immortal was once someone who chose not to die. Vesper had chosen ambition, twisting mercy into chains. Elara peered over the edge, the wind whipping her curls, carrying the scent of pine and impending rain. Her frailty surged, vision blurring at the edges, but resolve hardened her gaze. The riders numbered 24, their armor glinting with frost, swords sheathed but ready, harbingers of the larger storm, where clans would clash not just for territory, but for the power their union might unleash. A Dhampir queen at Thorn's side could birth legions unbound by sunlight's tyranny, healers who wielded fangs as deftly as salves. Yet the cost, her transformation, his guilt absolved or amplified, wars that would paint the valleys red. "Fight them," she urged softly, her voice an intimate thread amid the chaos. "Or flee with me into the forest, choose us over the crown." He turned to her. The lockets rose, pressing against his heart like a thorn. In her eyes, he saw his own dilemma mirrored, the oscillation between light and shadow, life and eternity. Vesper's forces advanced, gates creaking under their assault, the castle's wards shimmering like fragile veils. Thorn's hand found hers, cool eternity clasping warm frailty, a pact sealed in silence. "I choose you," he vowed, the words a revelation that tasted of blood and redemption. But as arrows whistled through the night, one grazing his shoulder with a searing bite, Ilara cried out, pulling him down. The wound was shallow, yet it bled true. Vampire blood, dark and viscous, staining the stone. Pain, long forgotten, bloomed in his chest, not from the arrow, but from the sight of her terror. Below, Vesper laughed, a sound like shattering glass, as more riders poured into the courtyard, torches igniting the outer walls in a blaze of accusation. Thorn rose, drawing a hidden dagger from his boot, its blade etched with runes of old mercy. The battle erupted, guards clashing with intruders. Steel singing against steel, the air filling with cries, and the copper reek of first blood. Ilara, drawing on her healer's resolve, tore a strip from her cloak to staunch his wound, her touch an anchor amid the frenzy. Yet as Vesper's gaze locked on the balcony, recognition dawning, he raised a hand, signaling not attack, but capture. "The Dhampir lives, for now," the elder snarled. "Bring them both. The prophecy demands a reckoning." Thorn scooped Ilara into his arms, her weight feather-light against his strength, and leaped to a lower ledge, vanishing into the shadows of the adjoining wall. The forest loomed beyond, a black sanctuary laced with mist, but pursuit thundered close. In the locket's hidden warmth, their love festered as both salvation and snare. Had their kiss summoned this siege, or merely unveiled the betrayal long plotted? As branches whipped their faces in flight, Ilara's whisper cut through the din. "What if eternity means losing you to this war?" Thorn's silence was the cliff's edge, his choice hanging like the moon above, poised to fall. The forest swallowed them whole, its ancient boughs arching like the ribs of some colossal forgotten beast, branches laced with frost that snapped under Thorn's boots as he carried Ilara deeper into the shadowed embrace. Moonlight pierced the canopy in fractured shafts, silvering the mist that coiled around their legs like spectral hounds, the air thick with the resinous bite of pine and the loamy rot of fallen leaves. Her weight was negligible against his immortal frame, yet each jolt of their flight sent tremors through her frail form, her breath ragged gasps that warmed the hollow of his neck. The wound on his shoulder throbbed, a rare bloom of pain, vampire blood seeping through the torn cloak in dark rivulets that stained her makeshift bandage, the copper scent mingling with the night's damp chill. Ilara clung to him, her fingers digging into the wool at his back, not from fear alone, but from the intoxicating surge of their shared defiance. The kiss's echo still lingering on her lips like a forbidden sacrament. Thorn's mind churned with the philosophy of pursuit, centuries of evasion distilled into this frantic dash. Every escape was a choice deferred, a thread pulled from the tapestry of fate. He had mediated wars in marble halls where betrayals bloomed like nightshade, sparing lives to preserve a fragile peace among clans fractured by ambition. Lord Vesper's assault was no surprise, only the culmination of whispers he'd ignored. Eastern envoys in Vienna's underbelly, their eyes gleaming with the promise of a Dhampir's power twisted to their ends. The prophecy, that ironclad edict, was less divine warning than political shackle, forged to keep bloodlines pure and thrones secure. By yielding to Ilara, he had not just broken an oath but ignited the powder keg of civil strife, armies massing not for love's ruin but for the hybrid strength she embodied. A queen who could walk in daylight, heal with fangs as potent as salves, unbinding the nocturnal chains that bound his kind. They broke into a clearing ringed by gnarled oaks, their trunks scarred like ancient sentinels bearing witness to battles long faded into legend. Thorn set her down gently on a moss-covered stone, the texture soft and yielding beneath her. A brief respite amid the pursuit's thunder, hooves crashing through underbrush, distant shouts laced with the metallic ring of drawn steel. Ilara's legs buckled slightly as she stood, her chronic weakness flaring like embers stirred by wind, vision spotting with the haze of exertion. She pressed a hand to her side, feeling the flutter of her pulse, erratic as a moth against glass. While death hovered invisible in the mist, its presence a constant companion to her half-life. Abandoned in childhood, cast out by vampire kin who deemed her taint unworthy, she had rationalized solitude as survival, mending outcasts in Eldoria's fog-veiled hamlets with herbs that masked her own unraveling. Yet Thorn's touch had awakened an inevitable hunger, not for blood, but for the redemption of belonging, a love that promised transformation even as it courted curse. He knelt before her, tearing a fresh strip from his cloak to reinforce the bandage on his shoulder, his movements precise, almost tender, the candle-lit intimacy of the ritual chamber transposed to this wild sanctuary. The locket swung free from his collar, the wilted rose catching a stray moonbeam, its petals etched in silver as if weeping dew. "This wound is nothing," he said, his voice a low timbre that cut through the encroaching clamor, resonant with the guilt of one who had spilled rivers of blood, yet spared where mercy demanded. "But yours, your frailty calls to me like a siren's lament. I chose eternity in Bohemia's plague-ravaged fields, watching my family dissolve to ash, vowing vengeance that birthed endless wars. Ethics became my chain, pacts forged to atone, betrayals thwarted in shadowed councils. With you, Ilara, the prophecy's shadow feels not as doom, but as the beauty and suffering's forge, light born from our entwined darkness." She reached for the locket, her fingers tracing its contours, the metal cool against her warming skin, a symbolic bridge between his lost humanity and her fragile spark. Introspection flooded her, a philosophical tide. Was this love redemption, or the very curse that would consume them? Her mother's union had ended in bloodied sheets, birthing a daughter cursed to straddle worlds, yet in Thorn's gaze, abyssal depths flecked with gold, she glimpsed eternity not as isolation, but as shared vigil. "And if we run forever?" she whispered, her breath fogging the air between them, the scent of her, earth and wild time, intertwining with his of aged leather and storm. "The clans will hunt us, turning our choice into their war. I've healed the broken, felt death's chill in every fever I couldn't break. But you offer life eternal, a mercy that sees my soul beyond the Dhampir veil." Their hands met over the locket, a ritual of touch amid the chaos, her warmth seeping into his chill like dawn creeping over frost. For a heartbeat, the forest held its breath, the mist swirling in eddies that brushed their skin like ghostly caresses. Thorn drew her closer, his lips brushing her forehead, the gesture intimate, sensual in its restraint, a promise of depths unexplored, bodies and souls oscillating between light and shadow. "Every immortal was once someone who chose not to die," he murmured, the words a confession drawn from his core. "I choose to live with you, not as king or outcast, but as the man the plague stole. The wars may rage, Vesper's daggers may find our trail, but this—" He pressed the locket into her palm, closing her fingers around it. "This is our vow, wilted yet enduring." The moment shattered as branches exploded nearby, riders bursting into the clearing on steeds foaming at the bit, their eyes wild with unnatural fire. Vesper led them, his cloak billowing like raven wings, a curved blade in hand that gleamed with runes of binding. "The Oathbreaker and his mongrel," he sneered, his voice a silken venom that slithered through the mist, the air filling with the snort of horses and the creak of leather. "The prophecy foretold this folly. Your union births not salvation, but the unraveling of realms. Surrender, Thorn, and spare the Dhampir the agony of your fall. Our clans unite under my banner. Your ethics are but chains we will shatter. Thorn rose, positioning himself between Alara and the threat, his dagger drawn, the blade an extension of his ethical resolve, mercy tempered with steel. Alara clutched the locket, its rose pressing into her skin like a talisman, her frailty yielding to a surge of defiant strength, borrowed from their bond. The first clash erupted. A rider lunged, sword arcing toward Thorn, who parried with lethal grace, the impact reverberating through the clearing like thunder's echo. Blood sprayed, mortal-tainted from the fallen assailant, splattering the moss in crimson arcs that steamed in the cold. Alara dodged a second attack, her healer's instincts guiding her to a fallen branch, wielding it as a makeshift staff, her strikes fueled by the terror of loss. Vesper circled, his eyes locked on the locket in her grasp, recognition dawning like a poisonous bloom. That relic, it hides more than sentiment. The prophecy conceals a deeper truth. The rose's line binds the blood, and your touch awakens it. Yield it, Dhampir, or watch your lover's kingdom crumble. His words unveiled a revelation. Betrayal not just political, but arcane. The locket a key to powers the clans coveted, twisting their love into a weapon for greater wars. Thorn faltered mid-strike, the weight of this truth crashing upon him, guilt flaring anew as Alara's cry pierced the fray. A rider's blade nicking her arm, drawing her blood in a thin, vital line. He whirled, scooping her up once more, slashing a path through the press as they fled deeper into the woods, Vesper's laughter chasing them like a curse. The locket burned in her hand, its secrets pulsing with forbidden light. Had their choice unlocked not redemption, but a destiny that demanded one sacrifice the other to save the night? As dawn's first blush tainted the horizon, Thorn's whisper hung unresolved. What price will eternity exact from us now? The dawn's hesitant blush clawed at the forest's edge, painting the mist in strokes of pale rose and bruised lavender, as if the sky itself mourned the night's unraveling. Thorn's arms burned with the strain of flight, not from fatigue. Immortality knew no such mercy, but from the weight of Alara's form pressed against him, her bloodied arm leaving a warm smear on his cloak, the scent of it sharp and vital, mingling with the pine's resinous bite and the metallic tang of spilled assailant blood trailing in their wake. They burst through a thicket of thorns that tore at fabric and flesh alike, the barbs drawing thin lines on his unchanging skin, a fleeting sting that grounded him in her mortality. Vesper's pursuit thundered behind, hooves churning the earth into muddied slurry. The elders' war cries a cacophony of betrayal that echoed through the trees like shattering prophecies. Alara's breath came in shallow, labored bursts against his neck, her frailty amplified by the wound. A shallow gash that wept crimson, her half-blood refusing to clot as swiftly as a mortal's might. She clutched the locket in her fist, its edges biting into her palm, the wilted rose within pulsing with an unnatural warmth as if awakened by Vesper's revelation. The relic was no mere keepsake. It was a conduit, forged in the ancient lines of Bohemian sorcery, binding blood to blood in ways the prophecy had concealed to safeguard the clan's fragile power. Her mother's tales had hinted at such artifacts, talismans that could merge shadows and light, birthing hybrids not as abominations, but as saviors or tyrants, depending on the hand that wielded them. Introspection clawed at her amid the chaos. This love, once rationalized as fleeting empathy, now demanded a choice that transcended survival, embrace the locket's power and risk unleashing wars that would eclipse the skirmishes of Vienna's courts, or shatter it, preserving their solitude at the cost of her fading life. Thorn veered toward a hidden ravine, its banks choked with ivy and frost-laced ferns, the air growing cooler, heavier with the subterranean hush of underground streams murmuring like forgotten confessions. He lowered her onto a ledge of moss-slick rock, the texture yielding and damp beneath her, a cradle amid the storm. His shoulder wound had sealed, vampire resilience knitting flesh with silent efficiency, but hers festered, the edges inflamed. drawing a hiss from her lips as she bound it tighter with a strip of her torn skirt. The forest's canopy above filtered the encroaching light, casting dappled shadows that danced across their faces like specters of doubt. "The locket," he said, his voice a resonant murmur laced with centuries' guilt, kneeling before her, his hands hovering near her injury, cool fingers tracing the air without touch. Vesper spoke truth in his venom. It unlocks more than memory. In my youth, during the plagues, I bound it with a demon's pact, not just for vengeance, but to preserve a spark of light against the endless dark. Your blood. Our union. It awakens that spark, forging eternity from frailty. But the clans will twist it into chains, wars that devour the innocent I've sworn to protect. She met his gaze, hazel eyes stormy with gold-flecked resolve, the locket's chain now looped around her wrist like a bracelet of thorns. Pain radiated from her arm, a dull throb that mirrored the deeper ache in her core, the chronic weakness that had shadowed her since birth, sapping her strength in hamlets where she healed others, but withered unseen. Abandoned by kin who saw her as prophecy's stain, she had desired not power, but a tether to endure the beauty of suffering, the light that pierced isolation's veil. Yet here, in Thorn's ethical torment, his solitary mediation of feuds, his restraint amid betrayals, she found inevitability. Love as both redemption and curse, a force that demanded they choose not flight, but confrontation. "Then let it be our weapon," she whispered, her voice intimate, sensual in its defiance, breath fogging the chill between them. The air hummed with texture, the drip of dew from leaves, the distant clash of steel as Vesper's riders closed in, the faint, coppery warmth of her blood scenting the mist. "I've resisted this pull since the Great Hall, rationalized it as shared loneliness. But death walks with me always, invisible in every breath. With you, it's not curse, it's choice. Transform me, Thorn. Let mercy resurrect what the prophecy damned." He cupped her face, thumb brushing the curve of her jaw, the contact electric, a bridge of warmth and void, life oscillating toward eternity. The locket flared in her grasp, crimson light bleeding through her fingers, illuminating the ravine's walls in veins of glowing runes that mirrored the prophecy's forbidden script. Visions cascaded unbidden, not carnage, but rebirth. Ilara rising unyielding, her frailty alchemized into hybrid grace, Thorn's guilt dissolving in the shared pulse of their blood mingled. Wars would come. Eastern clans fracturing under Vesper's ambition, political daggers flashing in shadowed councils, but their union could forge truces from the ashes, light piercing the nocturnal shroud. Every immortal was once someone who chose not to die. Now they chose to live entwined, redemption woven from the wilted rose's thorns. Thorn pricked his palm with a thorn from the thicket, dark blood welling, then guided her hand to meet it, their life forces merging in a ritual of touch. The locket absorbed it, humming like a heartbeat reborn, and Ilara gasped as strength surged through her, a vital fire quenching her thirst, mending the gash with ethereal speed, her skin paling to match his moonlit pallor, yet retaining the gold in her eyes, a beacon of retained humanity. No longer frail, she stood, lithe and empowered, the Dhampir veil lifted into something transcendent, eternal yet alive, healer and predator in harmony. Vesper's riders crested the ravine, blades drawn, the elder's face twisting in fury as the locket's light bathed the scene, blinding them momentarily. "Abomination!" he roared, spurring his mount forward, but Thorn and Ilara moved as one, shadows blurred into motion. Her strikes precise with newfound fangs bared, his ethical blade sparing where possible, felling only the irredeemable. Vesper lunged, sword arcing, but Ilara parried with the locket's chain, the relic channeling a burst of crimson force that hurled him back, shattering his steed's runes and scattering his forces in disarray. As the survivors fled into the dawn, The forest falling silent save for the rustle of leaves and their mingled breaths, Thorn drew Ilara close, the wilted rose now blooming faintly in the locket's heart, a symbol of suffering transmuted. Wars loomed on the horizon, betrayals yet to unfold, but in this fragile peace their choice echoed. Love as the ultimate redemption. Eternity chosen not in isolation, but in the light of shared shadows. The prophecy lay broken, not in ruin, but in the quiet dawn of possibility where death yielded to the pulse of two souls forever bound. If this story has already captured you, leave a like. It helps the voices of those who chose eternity reach more hearts.